The emergency signal had been broadcasting for 17 standard cycles when Ambassador Krixtal of the Valoran High Council finally decided something needed to be done about it. The signal came from Nexara Prime, a small colony world at the edge of civilized space. The planet held perhaps 40,000 souls, mostly Nebulan farmers and a few hundred merchants from various species who had settled there to escape the crowded core worlds. Krixtal stretched his 3 arms and adjusted his ceremonial robes before addressing the gathered representatives. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Federation was filled with delegates from over 200 species, all of them waiting to hear what action would be taken. "Fellow representatives," Krixtal began, his voice amplified by the translation system that allowed every species to understand him in their own tongue. "As you know, Nexara Prime has sent a distress signal. The Drakvar hive has arrived in their system." A murmur of fear rippled through the assembly. The Drakvar were not members of the Federation. They were something far worse. They were a swarm species, billions of insectoid creatures that traveled through space, consuming everything in their path. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply ate. "Our scouts report that the Drakvar arrived in overwhelming numbers," Krixtal continued. "Early estimates suggest a swarm of at least 3 million individual creatures, supported by 17 hive ships. The colony's defense grid has been destroyed. Their communication arrays are barely functional. They are requesting immediate assistance." The assembly fell silent. Every representative knew what this meant. Sending a fleet to fight the Drakvar would be expensive and dangerous. Many ships would be lost. Many lives would be ended. And for what? A small farming colony at the edge of nowhere? Representative Thulva of the Minoxi Collective raised his thin gray hand. "With respect to the Council, Nexara Prime is not a strategically important world. The resources required to mount a rescue operation would be better spent fortifying the inner systems against future Drakvar incursions." Several other representatives nodded in agreement. This was the way of the galaxy. The strong protected themselves. The weak were left to fend for themselves. "The Celesti Union agrees," said the representative from that ancient civilization. She was a being of pure energy, contained within a crystalline shell that gave her a roughly humanoid form. "We must think of the greater good. 40,000 lives, while unfortunate to lose, represent a statistically insignificant portion of the Federation's total population. Logic dictates that we focus our resources on protecting the majority." More nods, more agreement. Krixtal felt a familiar weight settle into his hearts. This was always how it went. The Federation talked about unity and cooperation, but when danger came, every species looked out for themselves first. "Is there anyone willing to send aid?" Krixtal asked, though he already knew the answer. Silence. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice spoke up. "The Human Alliance will go." Every head in the assembly turned toward the human delegation. There were only 3 of them, seated in the smallest section of the hall. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 200 years ago. They were considered primitive by most standards, their technology inferior, their culture violent and unstable. The speaker was Admiral Sarah Chen, the senior human representative to the Federation. She was a small woman by human standards, with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold fire within them. She stood without any sign of fear or hesitation. "The Human Alliance formally volunteers to respond to the distress call from Nexara Prime," she said. "We will dispatch our 3rd Fleet immediately." Representative Thulva made a sound that his species used to express disbelief. "The humans? You cannot be serious, Admiral. The Drakvar swarm numbers in the millions. Your entire fleet would be destroyed before they even reached the colony." "We're aware of the risks," Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Then why would you go?" the Celesti representative asked. "It is illogical. You have no connection to Nexara Prime. no trade agreements, no alliance treaties. The inhabitants are not your people. Why would you sacrifice your ships and your soldiers for strangers?" Admiral Chen smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "Because they asked for help," she said. "Because they're scared and alone and about to die. And because no one else is willing to go." The assembly erupted in whispered conversations. Several representatives looked at the humans with expressions of confusion, as if they could not understand what they were seeing. "This is exactly the kind of furious behavior we have come to expect from humans," Representative Thulva said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They act on emotion rather than logic. They rush into danger without proper calculation. They put themselves at risk for no rational reason. This is why they will never be a truly civilized species." Admiral Chen did not respond to the insult. Instead, she turned to her two companions and nodded. They immediately began speaking into their communication devices, transmitting orders to the human fleet. "Admiral Chen," Krixtal said carefully, "the Council appreciates your willingness to assist, but Representative Thulva raises a valid concern. Your third fleet consists of only 12 ships. How do you intend to combat a Drakvar swarm with such limited forces?" "We'll figure it out when we get there," the Admiral replied. More disbelief, more whispered comments about human recklessness. But no one tried to stop them. After all, if the humans wanted to throw their lives away, that was their business. It would save the Federation the cost of sending their own ships. The human delegation left the assembly hall without another word. As they walked through the corridors of the Federation headquarters, the Admiral's aide, a young lieutenant named Marcus Webb, leaned close to her. "Admiral, are we really doing this?" he asked quietly. "We're really doing this," she confirmed. "The Third Fleet is our newest battle group. If we lose them, we'll have cut our military strength by almost a third." "I know." "And the Drakvar have never been defeated in open combat. Not once in recorded galactic history." "I know that too, Lieutenant." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the Admiral had volunteered. "Why, ma'am? Why are we doing this?" Admiral Chen stopped walking and turned to face the young officer. Her eyes, which had seemed so cold in the assembly hall, now showed something deeper, something that Marcus recognized as both sorrow and determination. "Because 200 years ago, when humanity first reached the stars, we found a galaxy that didn't want us. Every species we met looked at us and saw barbarians, primitives, animals who had somehow learned to build spaceships. They called us aggressive, violent, and furious. They said we would never belong in civilized society." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "And you know what? Maybe they were right about some of it. Humans are aggressive. We do have violent impulses. But we also have something else, something that most of these so-called civilized species seem to have lost along the way. We have compassion. We have the ability to look at strangers in pain and feel that pain as if it were our own. We can love people we've never met." The Admiral resumed walking, her pace faster now. 40,000 people are about to die on Nexara Prime. They're not human. They're not our allies. They're nothing to us, strategically speaking, but they're still people, living, thinking beings with families and dreams and fears. And they're crying out for help while the entire galaxy turns its back on them. She pushed through the doors that led to the shuttle bay. Her ship was waiting, engines already warming up for immediate departure. "The galaxy calls us furious, Lieutenant. They think that's an insult. But fury isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes fury is exactly what's needed. Sometimes you need people who are angry enough to fight when everyone else has given up. Sometimes you need people who care so much that they'll charge into hell itself to save a stranger." Marcus felt something stirring in his chest. It was pride, he realized. Pride in being human. Pride in serving under this woman who understood what it truly meant to wear the uniform. "The Third Fleet will be ready to deploy within the hour, ma'am," he said. Admiral Chen nodded and climbed into her shuttle. "Make sure everyone understands what we're getting into. No false promises, no guarantees of survival, just the truth." "And what is the truth, Admiral?" She looked back at him, and now there was fire in her eyes. Real fire, the kind that had driven humanity to conquer their own planet, to reach for the stars, to keep fighting when all hope seemed lost. "The truth is that we're humans, and humans don't leave people behind." 6 hours later, the Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Nexara system. 12 ships hung in the void, their hulls gleaming with fresh paint and their weapons systems fully charged. It was not an impressive fleet by galactic standards. The largest vessel, the carrier Prometheus, was barely a third the size of a standard Federation dreadnought. The others were a mix of destroyers, frigates, and support vessels that would have been considered obsolete by most advanced species. But size and technology were not everything. The ships of the Third Fleet carried something that could not be measured or quantified. They carried human soldiers, human pilots, human engineers, men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well that they might not return. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, studying the tactical display. What she saw made her stomach tighten with dread. The Drakvar swarm was even larger than the initial reports had suggested. The insects filled space like a living cloud, millions upon millions of individual creatures swarming around their massive hive ships. Each hive ship was a biological nightmare, a living vessel grown from the flesh of consumed worlds, bristling with weapons and protected by layers of organic armor. "I count at least 4 million individual Drakvar," reported her tactical officer, Commander Jackson. 22 hive ships. They've already established a perimeter around the planet." "What about the colony?" "Still there somehow. It looks like the Drakvar are taking their time, softening them up before the main assault." Admiral Chen nodded grimly. The Drakvar were methodical predators. They preferred to weaken their prey before consuming it, wearing down defenses and morale until resistance became impossible. The colony had probably been under constant bombardment for days. "Open a channel to all ships," she ordered. When the connection was established, she took a deep breath and addressed her fleet. "This is Admiral Chen. By now you've all seen what we're up against. I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. The Drakvar outnumber us by a ratio that I don't even want to calculate. Our ships are smaller, slower, and less powerful than theirs. By every rational measure, we should turn around and go home." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "But we're not going to do that. Because down on that planet are 40,000 people who are counting on us. They sent a distress call and we answered. That means something. That makes them our responsibility now." Her voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "I know what the rest of the galaxy thinks of us. They call us aggressive. They call us primitive. They call us furious. And today, we're going to prove them right. We're going to show them what human fury really looks like. We're going to show them why you never give up on people who are crying out for help. We're going to save that colony, or we're going to die trying. There is no middle ground. There is no retreat. There is only victory or death. And either way, the galaxy will never forget what happened here today." She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew. Every one of them was afraid. She could see it in their eyes, in the way they gripped their consoles, in the slight tremor of their hands. But none of them looked away. None of them suggested turning back. "All ships, battle stations. We're going in." The Third Fleet began its advance toward the swarm, 12 ships against millions of enemies. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the most human thing imaginable. And somewhere in the depths of space, watching through hidden sensors, the representatives of a dozen Federation species witnessed the beginning of something they had never seen before. They were about to learn what it meant to be saved by the so-called furious humans. The first Drakvar scouts detected the human fleet when they were still 300,000 kilometers from the main swarm. Immediately, a portion of the swarm broke away, perhaps 100,000 insects, and began moving to intercept. "Enemy contact," Commander Jackson reported. "Lead elements will reach us in approximately 4 minutes. Admiral Chen watched the approaching swarm on her display. The insects were fast, faster than any of her ships. They would catch the fleet long before they reached the planet. All ships. "Defensive formation Alpha," she ordered. "Focus all weapons on creating a clear path through the swarm. Don't stop for anything. Our only goal is to reach that planet." The fleet shifted into a tight wedge formation with the Prometheus at the center. The smaller destroyers and frigates took up positions around the carrier, creating a layered defense. 3 minutes until contact. 2 minutes. 1. The Drakvar hit them like a wave of living missiles. Individual insects, each one the size of a small shuttle, slammed into the fleet's shields with suicidal determination. They exploded on impact, their bodies filled with organic acids and incendiary compounds that ate through hull plating like water through paper. "Shields holding at 80%, reported the tactical officer. "Point defense systems are engaging." The space around the fleet became a hurricane of weapons fire. Laser batteries, railguns, and missile launchers filled the void with death, cutting through the Drakvar swarm in their hundreds. But for every insect that died, 10 more took its place. "Destroyer Valiant reports hull breach on Deck 7. Frigate Steadfast has lost main engines. The Drakvar are focusing their attacks on our flanks." Admiral Chen gripped the arms of her command chair until her knuckles turned white. Ships were dying, her people were dying, and they had barely begun to fight. "Signal the Steadfast to transfer crew to the nearest vessel and set self-destruct," she ordered. "We cannot slow down. Push forward all ships." The battle had only just begun, and already the Third Fleet was bleeding. But they did not stop. They did not retreat. They pushed forward through the swarm, through the fire and death, toward the planet where 40,000 strangers were waiting to be saved, because that was what humans did. That was what humans had always done. And the galaxy was about to learn why that made them the most dangerous species in existence. The Prometheus shook violently as another wave of Drakvar insects slammed into her shields. Warning alarms screamed throughout the ship, and damage reports flooded in from every section. Admiral Chen kept her eyes fixed on the tactical display, watching as her fleet fought its way through the swarm. They had been fighting for nearly 2 hours now. In that time, the Third Fleet had lost 3 ships. The frigate Steadfast had been the first to fall, its engines destroyed and its hull torn open by the relentless assault. The destroyer Valiant had followed shortly after, its ammunition depleted, its crew evacuated in escape pods that were immediately targeted by the swarm. The support vessel Hope had sacrificed itself to protect the main formation, ramming into a cluster of Drakvar hive scouts and detonating its reactor core. 9 ships remained. 9 ships against millions. "We're halfway to the planet," Commander Jackson reported, his voice hoarse from shouting orders for the past 2 hours. "But the main hive ships are starting to move. They're repositioning to intercept us." Admiral Chen studied the movements of the enemy fleet. The hive ships had been holding position around Nexara Prime, bombarding the colony and waiting for the swarm to finish off the human intruders. But now they were changing tactics. They had realized that the humans were not going to stop. Were not going to be driven away by simple swarm attacks. "How many hive ships are moving toward us?" 8, Admiral. The other 14 are maintaining position around the planet. 8 hive ships. Each one was a mountain of living flesh, a mobile fortress capable of spawning thousands of new Drakvar every hour. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, and they were coming for her fleet. "Signal all ships," Admiral Chen said. We're changing tactics. Standard fleet engagement won't work against those hive ships. We need to be creative. She pulled up a secondary display showing detailed scans of the approaching hive ships. The Drakvar vessels were organic, grown rather than built. That meant they had weaknesses that mechanical ships did not have. They needed to breathe, to eat, to process the biological fuel that powered their systems. Commander, what's the temperature inside a hive ship? Jackson looked confused by the question, but he pulled up the relevant data. According to Federation records, Drakvar hive ships maintain an internal temperature of approximately 40 degrees Celsius. Any hotter and their biological systems start to break down. And what happens if we raise that temperature significantly? Say, to several thousand degrees? Understanding dawned in the commander's eyes. They would cook from the inside out. But, Admiral, how would we get enough heat inside a hive ship? Their organic armor is resistant to most energy weapons. Admiral Chen smiled grimly. We're not going to use energy weapons. We're going to use something much more primitive. She opened a channel to Captain Elizabeth Wright, commander of the destroyer Firebreak. Wright was a veteran officer who had served with Chen for over 15 years. If anyone could pull off what the Admiral had in mind, it was her. Captain Wright, I need your ship to do something extremely dangerous. I assumed that's why we were here, Admiral. What do you need? I need you to get inside one of those hive ships. There was a pause on the other end of the channel. Inside, ma'am? The Drakvar hive ships have openings along their sides where they launch their swarm drones. Those openings are big enough for a destroyer to fit through. I need you to fly the Firebreak into one of those openings, penetrate as deep into the ship as you can, and then overload your reactor. Another pause, longer this time. When Captain Wright spoke again, her voice was steady. Understood, Admiral. What about my crew? Evacuate everyone except essential bridge personnel to the Prometheus before you make your run. Volunteers only for the final approach. With respect, Admiral, I don't think you'll have trouble finding volunteers. Every person on this ship knew what they were signing up for. Admiral Chen felt a tightness in her chest. These were good people, brave people, and she was asking them to die. Elizabeth, I want you to know that what you're doing matters. If we can take out even one of those hive ships, it could change the entire battle. I know, Sarah. Wright used the Admiral's first name, something she only did in private moments. We all know. That's why we're here. We're humans. This is what we do. The channel closed, and Admiral Chen watched as the Firebreak began to maneuver away from the main formation. Its crew was already transferring to the other ships, shuttle pods streaming between vessels even as the Drakvar continued their assault. 15 minutes later, the Firebreak was ready. Only 32 people remained on board, the minimum crew needed to pilot the ship and execute the Admiral's plan. 32 volunteers who had chosen to give their lives for strangers they had never met. Firebreak is beginning its attack run, Commander Jackson reported. The destroyer accelerated toward the nearest hive ship, weaving through the swarm with a skill that bordered on impossible. Drakvar insects threw themselves at the ship, tearing chunks from its hull, but the Firebreak kept going. Its remaining weapons fired continuously, clearing a path through the living cloud of enemies. They're taking heavy damage. Shields are gone. Hull integrity is failing. Come on, Elizabeth, Admiral Chen whispered. Come on. The hive ship loomed ahead of the Firebreak, a massive wall of living flesh covered in eyes and mouths and weapons. The launching bays were visible along its sides, dark openings that led into the creature's interior. The Firebreak aimed for the largest of these openings, its engines burning at maximum power. She's going to make it, Jackson said, his voice filled with wonder. The Firebreak disappeared into the hive ship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the hive ship began to convulse, its massive body twisting in what could only be described as agony. Flames erupted from multiple openings along its surface. The creature's weapons fell silent, its swarm drones falling away like dead leaves from a tree. Then the firebreak's reactor detonated. The explosion was visible even from the Prometheus, a brilliant flash of light that tore through the hive ship from within. The creature's body expanded, bulged, and then came apart in a spray of burning organic matter. Secondary explosions rippled through its remains as biological fuel stores ignited. The bridge crew of the Prometheus watched in stunned silence. Then, spontaneously, they began to cheer. The first hive ship had fallen. The first hive ship in recorded history to be destroyed by a species that the galaxy considered primitive. Admiral Chen did not cheer. She closed her eyes for a moment and said a silent prayer for Captain Wright and her crew. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the tactical display. 7 hive ships remained in the approaching group, and they had seen what had happened to their companion. They would be ready now, watching for any ship that tried to repeat the tactic. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "New formation. We're going to punch through to the planet before those hive ships can reach us. Focus all fire on clearing a path. Everything else is secondary." The 8 remaining ships of the Third Fleet began their final push toward Nexara Prime. Behind them, the swarm closed in, millions of insects hungry for human flesh. Ahead, the planet waited, its surface scarred by Drakvar bombardment, but still holding on. Still fighting. On the surface of Nexara Prime, Governor Iraltek of the Nebulon colony watched the battle unfold through the surviving observation satellites. He was an old being by his species standards, his skin faded to a pale blue and his limbs trembling with age. He had governed this colony for 30 years, watching it grow from a handful of settlers to a thriving community of farmers and merchants. Now he watched it die. The Drakvar had been bombarding the colony for 5 days. The main city was in ruins. The defensive grid had been destroyed in the first hours of the attack. Over 10,000 colonists had already perished, killed by falling debris or Drakvar scout parties, or simply the despair that came from knowing that no help was coming. But help had come, from the most unlikely source imaginable. "Governor," his aide said, "the human fleet has broken through the outer swarm. They're approaching the planet." Iraltek stared at the display in disbelief. He had sent the distress call expecting nothing. The Federation had abandoned them, as he knew they would. No species in the galaxy risked their own ships for the sake of others. That was simply not how the universe worked. But the humans had come. The so-called furious humans, the primitives, the barbarians that every civilized species looked down upon. They had heard the call for help, and they had answered. "How many ships do they have?" 8, Governor. They started with 12. 8 ships against the Drakvar armada. It was suicide. It was insanity. And yet they kept coming, fighting through the swarm with a ferocity that Iraltek had never seen from any species. "Open a channel to the human flagship," he ordered. After a moment, a human female appeared on the screen. Her face was covered in sweat and dirt, her uniform torn in several places. Behind her, Iraltek could see the chaos of a ship under heavy attack. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Alliance Third Fleet," she said. "Governor, we're here to get your people out." Iraltek felt his eyes fill with moisture, a sign of deep emotion among his kind. "Admiral, why? Why did you come? We have nothing to offer you. No strategic value, no resources worth fighting for." The Admiral smiled, and despite the exhaustion in her face, her eyes burned with determination. "Governor, you asked for help. That's all the reason we need. But your ships, your people, they're dying for us." "Yes, they are. And every one of them volunteered for this mission. They knew the odds. They knew they might not come back. And they came anyway, because somewhere along the way, humanity decided that some things are more important than survival." Iraltek was speechless. In all his years of dealing with the various species of the galaxy, He had never encountered anything like this. The Federation spoke of unity and cooperation, but when danger came, every species looked out for themselves. Only the humans, the species that everyone dismissed as primitive and emotional, actually lived by those ideals. Admiral, what do you need from us? We need your people gathered in one location. We're going to land shuttles and start evacuating as many colonists as we can, but we don't have much time. The hive ships will be in weapons range within the hour. Iraltech immediately began issuing orders to his remaining staff. The surviving colonists were scattered across the planet, hiding in bunkers and caves and ruined buildings. Gathering them in one place would make them vulnerable to Drakvar attack, but it was the only way to save them. We'll be ready, Admiral. And Admiral? Yes, Governor. Thank you. From the bottom of my hearts, thank you. The channel closed, and Iraltech turned to look out the window of his command bunker. In the sky above, he could see the flashes of weapons fire as the human fleet continued to fight. 8 ships against an empire of destruction. It should have been hopeless. But watching those ships, watching them refuse to give up even as they were torn apart, Iraltech felt something he had not felt in days. Hope. The Third Fleet reached Nexara Prime's orbit with 5 ships remaining. The destroyers Tempest and Horizon had been lost in the final push through the swarm, their crews fighting to the last breath to protect the other vessels. The frigate Ranger had been crippled and was now drifting, its surviving crew trying desperately to restart their engines. Admiral Chen looked at what remained of her fleet and felt the weight of command pressing down on her like a physical force. So many dead, so many good people sacrificed for this mission, and it was not over yet. "Begin landing operations," she ordered. "I want every shuttle we have on the surface. Marines will provide security while civilians are evacuated." The Prometheus and its escorts began launching shuttles toward the planet's surface. Each shuttle could carry 50 civilians, and the fleet had maybe 30 shuttles remaining after the battle. That meant they could evacuate 1,500 people per trip, assuming the shuttles could make it through the Drakvar swarm that still filled the space around the planet. "Admiral, the hive ships are entering weapons range." Chen looked at the tactical display. The 7 remaining hive ships from the intercepting group had arrived, taking up positions around the planet opposite the human fleet. The 14 hive ships that had been bombarding the colony were also repositioning, forming a complete sphere around Nexara Prime. The humans were now completely surrounded. Estimated time until shuttle operations are complete? At current pace, approximately 6 hours to evacuate all surviving colonists. But Admiral, we won't last 6 hours against this many hive ships. Chen knew he was right. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Drakvar had enough firepower to destroy her remaining ships in less than an hour. After that, the shuttles would be picked off one by one. The evacuation would fail. The colonists would die, unless she could find a way to buy more time. "Commander, what's the status of the Ranger?" "Still drifting, but they've restored basic maneuvering. No weapons, no shields, but they can move under their own power. Open a channel to their captain." A moment later, Captain Park's face appeared on screen. He was young for a captain, barely 30, with a bandage wrapped around his head that was stained with blood. "Admiral, we're trying to get back in the fight, but it's going to take time." "I'm not asking you to fight, Captain. I'm asking you to run." Park looked confused. "Ma'am, the Drakvar are predators. They respond to threats first and prey second. Right now, they see our fleet as the main threat and the planet as prey. But if someone were to break through their line and head for open space, they would have to decide whether to chase that ship or continue the attack." Understanding dawned in Park's eyes. "You want me to be bait? I want you to give us time. If you can draw off even a few of those hive ships, it could give us the hours we need to complete the evacuation. And if they don't chase me, then you get to live. But I think they will chase you, Captain. The Drakvar don't let prey escape. It's not in their nature." Park was quiet for a long moment, and Chen could see him thinking. He was weighing his life against the lives of 40,000 strangers. It was an impossible calculation, and yet Chen knew what his answer would be. She had served with Park for 3 years. She knew what kind of man he was. "I'll do it, Admiral, but I have one condition." "Name it." "When you get those people to safety, you tell them what happened here. You tell them that humans came to save them. Not because we had to, not because we owed them anything, but because it was the right thing to do. I want the galaxy to know that." Chen felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I will, Captain, I promise." "Then I'll see you on the other side, Admiral." One way or another. The channel closed, and Chen watched as the damaged Ranger began to accelerate toward a gap in the Drakvar perimeter. The ship was barely functional, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. It looked like a dying animal making one last desperate run for freedom. But it also looked like something else. It looked like bait. The Drakvar took it. 4 of the hive ships broke formation and began pursuing the Ranger, their massive bulk moving with surprising speed. Thousands of swarm insects peeled away from the main group and joined the chase. It was not enough to save the human fleet, but it reduced the odds significantly. "Admiral," Commander Jackson said quietly, "the Ranger won't last long against 4 hive ships." "I know," Chen replied, "but they're buying us time with their lives. Let's not waste it." She turned back to the tactical display, calculating their next move. The evacuation shuttles were landing on the surface, Marines pouring out to establish a perimeter. Thousands of colonists were already streaming toward the landing zones, desperate to escape the dying planet. But the battle was far from over. 17 hive ships still surrounded them, and millions of Drakvar insects still filled the void. The humans had won the first round, but the war was just beginning, and Admiral Sarah Chen was prepared to fight until her last breath to see those colonists reach safety. The galaxy called humans furious. Today, they would learn why that fury was the most powerful weapon in existence. The Ranger burned through the void like a comet of fire and desperation. Captain Park stood on his ruined bridge, watching the 4 hive ships closing in behind him. His ship had no weapons, no shields, and barely enough engine power to maintain its current speed. He was a dead man flying a dead ship, and he had never felt more alive. "Captain, the hive ships are gaining on us. Estimated intercept in 15 minutes. Park nodded calmly. 15 minutes was good. 15 minutes was more time for the Admiral to evacuate colonists. 15 minutes was worth dying for. "All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for emergency evacuation procedures. When I give the signal, everyone gets to the escape pods and launches for the nebula at bearing 72 Mark 5. The Drakvar might not notice small targets if they're focused on the ship." His first officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, stepped closer to him. "Sir, what about you?" "Someone has to keep the Ranger moving. If the ship goes dead in space, the Drakvar will lose interest and return to the main battle." "Captain, you can't—" "That's an order, Commander. When the time comes, you get our people to safety. That's your only job now." Kim's eyes were wet, but she nodded. She was a good officer. She would follow orders, even if those orders broke her heart. Park turned back to the view screen, watching the hive ships grow larger behind them. Massive mouths opened on their surfaces, ready to consume his vessel whole. He thought about his family back on Earth, about his parents who had been so proud when he made captain, about his younger sister who had promised to name her first child after him. He would never meet that child now, but maybe, just maybe, that child would grow up in a galaxy that remembered what humans had done here today. "Sir, something's happening," the sensor officer reported. "One of the hive ships is falling back." Park looked at the tactical display in confusion. Sure enough, one of the 4 pursuing hive ships had suddenly reversed course and was heading back toward Nexara Prime. Then a second one followed, then a third. What's going on? Why are they leaving? I don't know, sir. Wait, I'm picking up something strange. There's a ship approaching the planet from the opposite side of the system. It's broadcasting on Federation frequencies. Put it on screen. The display shifted to show a vessel that Park did not recognize. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Federation dreadnought, and its hull gleamed with a technology that seemed almost impossibly advanced. Golden light emanated from its engines, leaving trails of cosmic fire in its wake. "Federation vessel, identify yourself," Park transmitted. A voice responded, deep and resonant and filled with ancient power. "Human vessel, this is the Celesti ship Eternal Dawn. We have been observing your battle. We have come to render assistance." Park felt his heart skip a beat. The Celesti were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They had existed for millions of years, watching younger species rise and fall like waves on an infinite ocean. They almost never intervened in the affairs of others, preferring to observe from a distance. "Celesti vessel, why are you helping us?" "Your representative told our admiral that this mission was illogical." There was a pause before the response came. "Our representative was speaking from a position of cold calculation. But we have watched your fleet fight today. We have seen your ships sacrifice themselves for strangers. We have witnessed courage that we thought had vanished from the galaxy long ago." The voice seemed to carry a weight of emotion that Park had not thought the Celesti capable of expressing. "Your species has been in space for only 200 years. You are young, inexperienced, and by our standards, quite primitive. But today you have taught us something that we had forgotten over the millennia of our existence. You have reminded us why we once believed that the galaxy was worth protecting." The Eternal Dawn began engaging the Drakvar swarm, its weapons carving through the insects with devastating precision. Golden beams of light swept across the void, vaporizing thousands of Drakvar with each pulse. The hive ships that had been pursuing the Ranger turned to face this new threat, abandoning their chase entirely. "Human vessel, return to your fleet. Help your admiral complete the evacuation. The Celesti will hold the line." Park stared at the display in disbelief. One of the most ancient and powerful species in the galaxy had come to their aid. Not because of strategic interests or political calculations, but because they had been moved by human courage. "Celesti vessel, I don't know how to thank you." "You already have, Captain, by reminding us what it means to be truly alive." The Ranger limped back toward Nexera Prime, its crew cheering and crying and embracing each other with the fierce joy of unexpected survival. Behind them, the Eternal Dawn continued its assault on the Drakvar swarm, buying precious time for the evacuation. But the Celesti were not the only ones who had been watching. Admiral Chen received the news of the Celesti intervention with a mixture of relief and amazement. Her tactical display now showed not 1 but 3 additional vessels approaching the system, their transponders identifying them as ships from the Monoxy Collective, the Valoran High Council, and the Kreth Dominion. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the approaching vessels. They're offering to assist with the evacuation." Chen shook her head slowly, hardly believing what she was seeing. These were the same species whose representatives had refused to help in the Federation Assembly. These were the same civilizations that had called humans furious and primitive and irrational, and now they were coming to join the fight. "Open a channel to all approaching vessels," she ordered. Moments later, her screen was filled with faces from a dozen different species. Representatives from civilizations that had existed for thousands or millions of years, all of them looking at her with expressions that she had never seen directed at a human before. Respect, admiration, something that might even have been shame. Admiral Chen, spoke Representative Thulva of the Minoxi Collective, the same being who had dismissed humans as uncivilized barbarians. "We have come to offer our assistance. Our ships will help transport colonists to safety." "As will ours," added the Valoran representative. "And ours," said the Kreth commander. Chen felt a tightness in her throat that made it difficult to speak. "Why?" she managed. "Why now, after you refused to help before?" Thulva lowered his thin gray head in what appeared to be a gesture of shame. "Because we were wrong, Admiral. We calculated the costs and benefits of intervention. We determined that the risk was too great and the reward too small. We made the logical, rational, civilized decision to let 40,000 people die." His voice grew quieter. "But you did not make that calculation. You did not weigh costs and benefits. You heard a cry for help, and you answered, regardless of the consequences to yourselves. You reminded us that there are things more important than logic. There are things more valuable than survival." The Celesti representative appeared on screen, her crystalline form glowing with soft light. "For millennia, we have watched younger species struggle and fight and die. We have told ourselves that non-intervention was the enlightened path. We have convinced ourselves that we were above such primitive concerns as compassion and sacrifice." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something almost like tears in her voice. "But today, we watched 12 small ships charge into certain death to save strangers. We watched your people give their lives without hesitation or complaint. We saw something that we thought we had evolved beyond, and we realized that we had not evolved at all. We had simply forgotten what it meant to care." Admiral Chen stood in silence for a long moment, processing what she was hearing. The most powerful species in the galaxy, the beings who had looked down on humanity for 2 centuries, were admitting that they had been wrong. Not because humans had proven their technological or military superiority, but because humans had demonstrated something far more valuable. They had shown that compassion was not a weakness, that emotion was not a flaw, that the so-called fury of humanity was actually the purest expression of love. "Admiral," Commander Jackson said quietly, "the evacuation shuttles are reporting that all colonists have been loaded. We're ready to leave." Chen nodded and turned back to the assembled representatives. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your assistance. Our mission here is complete. 40,000 colonists have been evacuated and are being transported to safety. The ships of the combined fleet, human and alien alike, began the process of withdrawing from the system. The Celesti vessel continued to hold the Drakvar at bay, its weapons creating a corridor of safety through which the evacuation fleet could escape. Behind them, Nexara Prime burned. The Drakvar had won the planet, but they had lost something far more important. They had lost their reputation as an unstoppable force. For the first time in galactic history, a species had stood against them and rescued people from their grasp. The journey back to Federation space took 3 days. In that time, word of what had happened at Nexara Prime spread across the galaxy. News feeds carried the story of how 12 human ships had charged into a Drakvar swarm to save strangers. Social networks buzzed with discussions about the nature of humanity and what their actions meant for the future of the Federation. By the time the fleet arrived at Federation Station Alpha, there was a crowd waiting to greet them. Admiral Chen stood at the airlock of the Prometheus, looking out at the gathered masses. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species had come to witness the return of the human fleet. They carried signs and banners in dozens of languages, all of them expressing the same basic sentiment. "Thank you." Governor Iraltek was the first to approach her as she stepped off the ship. The elderly Nebulan's face was wet with tears, and he reached out to grasp her hands with a grip that trembled with emotion. "Admiral Chen," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to express what you have done for my people. You saved us. You saved us when no one else would. Chen gently squeezed his hands. Governor, we didn't do anything special. We just did what humans do. We helped. That is special, Admiral. That is the most special thing in the entire galaxy. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the Federation had seen before. Representatives from every major species came forward to offer their thanks and their apologies. They spoke of how they had misjudged humanity, how they had dismissed human emotion as a primitive weakness rather than recognizing it as their greatest strength. Ambassador Krixtal of the Valoran High Council presented Admiral Chen with the Star of Unity, the highest honor the Federation could bestow. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Federation, I offer our deepest gratitude and our most sincere apology. For 2 centuries we have called your species furious. We meant it as an insult, a way of dismissing humans as emotional and irrational. But we were wrong about what that fury meant. He stepped back and looked at her with eyes that held newfound respect. Your fury is not a weakness. It is love that refuses to be silent. It is compassion that refuses to be ignored. It is the fire that burns in the hearts of those who cannot stand by while innocents suffer. Krixtal raised his voice so that everyone in the assembly could hear. Today, I propose a new definition for the word furious when applied to humans. Let it no longer mean angry or irrational or primitive. Let it instead mean brave. Let it mean compassionate. Let it mean willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. He turned to face the gathered crowd. Let furious be the highest compliment we can pay to any species in the galaxy, and let us all aspire to be a little more furious ourselves. The crowd erupted in cheers. Beings who had never spoken to a human before pushed forward to shake hands, to offer thanks, to simply be close to the species that had changed everything they thought they knew about the universe. Admiral Chen accepted their praise with grace, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She was thinking of Captain Wright and the crew of the Firebreak who had flown their ship into the heart of a hive ship to give the fleet a fighting chance. She was thinking of Captain Park and his brave sacrifice, a sacrifice that had been made unnecessary by the arrival of the Celesti. She was thinking of the hundreds of humans who had died in this battle, their lives given freely to save people they had never met. Later that night, after the ceremonies were over and the crowds had dispersed, Admiral Chen stood alone on the observation deck of Federation Station Alpha. She looked out at the stars, those countless points of light that represented infinite possibilities and infinite dangers. A soft footstep behind her announced the arrival of Lieutenant Marcus Webb. The young officer had been with her since the beginning of this mission, had watched as their fleet was torn apart by the Drakvar swarm, had seen humans at their best and their worst. "Admiral," he said quietly, "how are you holding up?" Chen took a deep breath before answering. "I'm thinking about the ones we lost. 347 humans died in this battle, Marcus. 347 people who will never go home, never see their families again, never grow old. They knew the risks, ma'am. They volunteered anyway." "I know. That's what makes it harder somehow. They weren't tricked or forced. They chose to give their lives for strangers. What kind of species produces people like that?" Marcus moved to stand beside her, looking out at the same stars. "The best kind, Admiral. The kind that the galaxy desperately needs." They stood in silence for a while, 2 humans lost in thought among the stars. Then Chen spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "The galaxy is going to be different after this, Marcus. What we did at Nexara Prime changed things. Other species are starting to understand what we've always known, that compassion is not weakness, and that love is not irrational. Do you think it will last?" Chen smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I don't know. But I know that we'll keep trying. We'll keep answering distress calls and rushing to help strangers and doing all the furious, emotional, irrational things that make us human. And eventually, maybe the rest of the galaxy will learn to do the same. She turned away from the window and headed for the door. There was work to be done. There were funerals to arrange, families to notify, ships to rebuild. The aftermath of heroism was always mundane and painful. But as she walked through the corridors of the station, Admiral Chen noticed something she had never seen before. Aliens were smiling at her, not the polite, distant smiles of diplomatic courtesy, but genuine smiles of warmth and gratitude. They nodded as she passed, some reaching out to touch her shoulder briefly, others simply saying thank you in their native languages. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed it. Not with weapons or technology or political maneuvering, but with simple, stubborn compassion, with the refusal to calculate the cost of doing the right thing. With fury. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of Nexara Prime continued to spread. It became a legend, a tale told to children across 1,000 worlds. The story of how the so-called furious humans had arrived to save the day when no one else would. Other species began to emulate human behavior. Ships from civilizations that had never intervened in the affairs of others started responding to distress calls. The Federation established a rapid response fleet modeled on human military doctrine, staffed by volunteers from dozens of species who wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. The Drakvar, for their part, grew more cautious. They had learned that some prey would fight back, that some civilizations would not simply watch their neighbors be consumed. The swarms still came, still fed, still destroyed. But they chose their targets more carefully now, avoiding systems where they might find human ships waiting. And humanity itself grew stronger. New generations came of age hearing stories of Admiral Chen and Captain Wright and Captain Park and all the others who had given everything at Nexara Prime. They grew up understanding that being human meant something, that it carried responsibilities as well as privileges. They grew up furious, and the galaxy was better for it. On the first anniversary of the battle, a memorial was unveiled on the surface of Nexara Prime. The planet had been reclaimed by the Federation, rebuilt by a coalition of species who had been inspired by human sacrifice. At the center of the restored capital city stood a massive statue depicting a human soldier reaching out to help a fallen alien. At the base of the statue, carved in letters that would last for millennia, were words that had become the unofficial motto of humanity's role in the galaxy. They asked for help. We answered. Simple words, furious words, human words. And they told the truth about what happened when the so-called furious humans arrived to save the day. Admiral Sarah Chen attended the unveiling ceremony, older now, her hair fully white, her body bent by age and the weight of memory. But her eyes still held that fire, that determination, that fury that had driven her to charge into impossible odds to save strangers. When asked to speak, she kept her words brief. 347 humans gave their lives here. They did not die for glory or conquest or political advantage. They died because they heard people crying for help and could not bear to turn away. They died being human. She paused, looking out at the crowd that included beings from every species in the Federation. "Be furious," she said. "Be compassionate. Be willing to sacrifice for strangers. Be human, regardless of what species you were born into. That is how we honor the fallen. That is how we make their sacrifice mean something." She stepped down from the podium, and the crowd parted before her with reverence. Governor Iraltek, still alive despite his advanced age, reached out to take her hand one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Chen smiled and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for calling for help. Thank you for giving us the chance to show what humans can be." She walked away from the memorial, away from the cheering crowds and the flashing cameras. Behind her, the statue reached toward the stars, a permanent reminder of the day when fury became the salvation of the galaxy, the day when only the so-called furious humans arrived to save the day, and did exactly that.